Hello everyone. Welcome to the third day of React Finland. I hope you enjoyed the other 2 days as well. I'm your MC for today, and a bit introduction about me. I'm Manjula Dubey, and I work on React. I'm front-end developer. I'm also an organizer of React India. And today, with our third day, we have our first speaker, Nasim Selmani, and a bit introduction about him. He is a COO and co-founder at D-Day. He's also a professional basketball player, and he also does a podcast about men and feelings. So everyone is excited about his talk. So let's over to you, Nasim Selmani.
Hi everyone, my name is Nasim Selmani and I was born and raised here in Finland, but I belong in ethnic and religious minorities in this society. I am the COO and one of the co-founders of a DEI agency called DayDay. DEI stands for Diversity, Equity and Inclusion. My DEI journey started 4 years ago when I became the first Chief Inclusion Officer at Slush. Slush is this huge tech and startup conference held in Helsinki. In this presentation, I will be telling you about inclusion, why it is important, and then I'm going to share also some of the learnings that I made while being the Slush's Chief Inclusion Officer. So let's start. I'm quite sure that most of us have a memory of being excluded in some point of our lives. And what I want you to do right now is to think about that moment when you were excluded, whether it happened in kindergarten or school or at work. And think about how did you feel in that situation. It doesn't feel good, right? And some of us might have these feelings also at work. And if that's the case, I'm quite sure it's logical for you as well that you can do your best then. And it has like several consequences. Well, the first is that you can't reach your full potential, and you're not motivated enough. The second thing is that you might stay silent in situations where you would actually have something to say, but because you feel that your opinions are not valued, so you just let it be. And the third thing is that you might not feel psychologically safe. But in addition to that, if you belong in minoritized or marginalized group, you might also feel minority stress. And like when surrounded by your coworkers, because you might be afraid of that. When is the next time that someone is going to say something inappropriate? For example, in a form of a discriminative joke. So basically, inclusion is the absence of exclusion. And that's why I wanted you to think about what exclusion feels. And inclusion means a continuous effort and practice to create spaces where anyone can feel valued and a sense of belonging. In other words, inclusion is an effort to create room for diversity and people with different backgrounds to be their authentic selves without the fear of discrimination. In an individual level, it means that you will be seen, heard, respected, and you will be seen, heard, respected, and included. So why inclusion is important? And I'm going to give you some data points here. A study was made about teams where they had inclusive leaders. And they found out that teams are 17% more likely to report high performing when there's an inclusive leader, and 20% more likely to make high quality decisions, and 29% more likely to behave collaboratively. These are quite impressive figures, and there's a lot of studies made about DEI topics recently. So you can, for example, the big consulting companies have done a lot of research about this topic. So there's plenty of data available. So I'm not going there anymore. But I'm gonna share the learnings that I made while being the Slush's Chief Inclusion Officer. And this picture is actually taken from the main stage after the program ended. And it's taken over by the volunteers and some of the team members. So building inclusion, in my opinion and in my experience, requires at least these three things that I'm going to mention soon. The first, and I think the most important thing, is the manager's support. Because if you don't have the manager's support, then it's really difficult to advance inclusion within the organization. And if the company makes the decision to advance inclusion, it must be prioritized by everyone, including the managers. And of course, managers are the ones that can give you also resources to do the work that is needed in order to build inclusion. And me, for example, I invested in the well-being because I wanted everyone to know that they are taken care of when they need to be taken care of the most. And the second thing was that I invested in a feedback system or a tool which gathered information, very valuable information from our employees in a weekly basis. So basically I knew all the time what the employees of our organization were thinking and what were the things that I needed to improve or make more inclusive. For example, the employees pinpointed some structures and processes and practices that needed to be more inclusive. Then the last thing, which I'm going to raise here, is the time. Because the change doesn't happen overnight. So you need to invest time in this work. And we, for example, we invested a lot of time in spending time together with the whole team, and also like our own teams. We spent a lot of time just having conversations and getting to know each other. And we also had these very uncomfortable conversations, for example, about diversity and actually the lack of it within our team, our speaker lineup, and our attendees. And we tried to understand the situation more with the conversations that we had. And the last thing that we did also, which I want to mention here, is that on Fridays we had this thing called Friday brunch. So it was brunch, which was this session, 2-hour session, where anyone from the organization were able to come and present something that they were really passionate about. And that made them feel seen and heard because they had the attention of the entire organization. And we also had a couple of sessions about taboos. And I can tell you that those conversations were really uncomfortable, but those were the ones also that built trust among us. So what I want you to know from this presentation as well is that in order to build inclusion, you need manager support, resources, and time. Because the change doesn't happen overnight, and building inclusion is a continuous process, and it's not a state that you can achieve. And I want to end this presentation with the wise words of Simon Sinek. When we take care of our people take care of our business. Thank you very much.
Hello.
Hey.
That was a wonderful talk, actually. Very nice.
Thank you so much. And I actually didn't know that in the beginning when you presented me that I was supposed to say something about me and the presentation. So that's why I stayed muted. Sorry for that.
All good. Okay, so do we have some questions? Okay, I have some questions. Like, for example, I think I would like to know that how would you, if you want to kind of bring this sort of environment in a company, how would you tell your higher managers or to adapt to this if they are not already doing it?
Well, I think that if an organization wants to advance inclusion, like it has to come, like usually it comes also within the organization. So some of the people might feel that they are being excluded. And usually if there are some people that says something like that, then it's of course like the role of managers to see that and also take that further. So I think building inclusion in an organization comes within the organization, actually.
And may I just add that it's also a very communicational issue. So, for example, if you want to get the manager support, usually you need to internally communicate about the moral, but also the business imperative that lies within building inclusion in an organization. And luckily, this is becoming more and more known. So it's and there's more data and more research available about the benefits. So therefore, it is more easily argumented to the leadership levels as well. That's also one point. The benefits are clear, so it wouldn't need a lot to get people behind it in that sense.
And there actually there was like as in my presentation, I said that there were I brought up just some data points, but there's also a lot of data points that combines the effect of diversity and inclusion. And that's something that I wanted to leave out from this presentation because I wanted to focus on only inclusion.
Yeah. I think it is a pretty emotional and heavy topic that every company should adapt to, I feel. But there are a few companies that aren't still adapting, and but it should be an important part, I feel. So
yes, definitely.
Yep.
I totally agree with you, and I think that the companies who will adapt in building inclusion will also benefit from it in the longer term. And those who do not advance inclusion in their companies, they will suffer from it.
Yep. Yeah, I kind of also feel that maybe companies should also run more programs to make people aware of this. I mean, uh, maybe there are programs, but not that people know of in the company that are running. I mean, it's just in the background. So I really feel that it's really important.
Definitely, and that goes into Nassim's points about giving it the resources and time needed, because we still need a lot of awareness raising regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion as a whole. So definitely it requires time, because we still need to deepen our understanding about these topics. And diversity, equity, and inclusion are a big umbrella, and there are many aspects under it that we need to take into account. So definitely we need to raise awareness and move to more concrete action. And one way to do that is, for example, by measuring inclusion. And even though it's hard because it's very qualitative way of measuring inclusion, but that is, we still need to develop these types of standardized processes and practices of measuring it in order to also detect areas of improvement within an organizational level.
Yeah, and we actually measured that with different questions at Slush as well. We didn't exclusively ask whether you feel included, but with different questions we were able to see how engaged our employees were.
Yeah. I think that's pretty good. I mean, I also feel that like in certain companies, like when I was in India, the experience was very much different. But when I moved to Germany, I started seeing that people really care more about this. And I mean, even in my previous company, there were some of the numbers exclusively like, at this position, we really want to hire female devs. What do you feel about this? Like, if there are some job profiles exclusively, based off female devs, or at this position, we really want to hire female devs. What do you think about it? Is it biased, or what?
Well, I could turn it this. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that I think that the most important thing is to highlight that there is a good intention behind it, and to showcase what is the main idea of this kind of campaign or promotion, and highlight that the idea is not to exclude, but the idea is to support and enhance the possibilities of some minority groups. So I think that the communication is the key, and not just thinking about what is the surface, that we want more women into tech or women into dev positions, but to highlight that we want to support these groups who want to attend to these positions.
Exactly, and sometimes that is necessary when there are, for example, industries or companies where there is a lot of homogeneity and lack of, for example, underrepresented groups. So I think Emmi verbalized and communicated it very brilliantly.
Yeah, that makes more sense. Yeah, I mean, I really want, when I moved to Germany, I really saw this change, and I really felt that I should really start thinking about it, because in India, the people still think that, okay, the tech uh, is there, but like they really want to get things done. I mean, it's like, there are no want to keep in our gender, or so that was a really good stuff when I moved here. So I think your talk was really good, Nasim. Thanks for that.
Thank you very much, and for it was a pleasure to be here and talk about inclusion.
Thank you. Okay. So we move on to our next talk. And our next speaker is Jasmin Assulin. And so she would tell us about her fun fact, basically, instead of me telling her about a fun fact. So she would introduce herself with a fun fact. And her topic is really, I'm really interested in her topic. So I would really be excited for it. And she would be talking about structural racism. So over to you, Jasmin. But yes, you should start with your fun fact.
Okay, hi everybody. Fun fact. I don't know it's a fun fact, but I am crazy about dogs. I'm the kind of person who stops dogs with their owners just to pet them. Of course, I ask for permission in advance, but yeah, I love dogs a lot. That's the first thing that came up to my mind. But today, I'm not here to talk about dogs. I'm here to talk about a bit heavier topic called structural racism. Just a second, I'm going to share my screen and continue. Okay. Good, so you can see my screen. Well, first of all, I'm going to introduce myself a bit better soon, but to start off, structural racism is a huge topic to cover in 10 to 15 minutes, but I'm going to do my best and bring up some basic points with the hope of maybe broadening your understanding about racism. And my name is Jasmin Assulin. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Day. Like Nasim said, DEI stands for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And Day is an agency that helps other organizations with their diversity, equity, and inclusion and inclusive communications journeys. My professional background is specified in diversity, equity, and inclusion, but especially racial equity, because like I said before, DEI is a huge umbrella. And also I have a professional background in communications. Day aims to normalize diversity, but also strive for equity and build inclusion with the organizations that we work with. So this is our basically 3 way of thinking of this work that we are doing. And I just wanted to start off with a picture of little Jasmin. Always good to start with baby pictures, but I wanted to bring this up because my background is in diversity, equity, inclusion, racial equity, and communications. But who knows, maybe in another life, I could have become a coder as well. But when I grew up in Finland in the 90s, there was not a lot of representation or role models of people like me in the technology industry at large. So it was maybe harder for me unconsciously to dream about becoming a coder or maybe see myself in the industry because I didn't see relatable role models. But who knows, maybe in another life it could have gone differently. But I just wanted to point this out that representation and role models also have a huge impact on what we can dream about achieving or being in life. And therefore, I just wanted to bring up that when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, or diversity and inclusion, understanding racism, understanding structural racism, and advancing racial equity is one key element that we need to take into account when we are doing and thinking about this work. And as I said, the umbrella is huge. Today, I'm talking only about the racial equity aspect. And to bring more context to it, mostly when we talk about racism, the common conception is that racism is an event between people, that it's a straightforward interaction between people, that is something very visible, like a racial slur, hate speech, or something like that. And that's true. That is the interpersonal level of racism. But to give it a broader context, racism is also a structure. It's not just the event that we might sometimes witness of some person shouting at a person of color, for example, on the street. It's can be defined also as discrimination based on race, but it's also a broader system where there is structural and also institutional, like social, economic, and political power at advantage over some people, like in this case, Black, Indigenous, and people of color in different societies. So to put it in other words, we often talk about prejudice, we often talk about discrimination. We all have prejudices, and discrimination is action based on prejudice. But racism is a more big system where this prejudice that we have towards Black, Indigenous, and people of color is combined with the institutional power, and that is structural racism in a nutshell. Racism can be defined, for example, in 4 levels. This is one framework of looking at it. And like I said about the event between people, that refers to interpersonal racism, which is the most visible, the most daily thing that is the most tangible one to our eyes, because it refers to racism that occurs between individuals. But in addition to that, for example, Black, Indigenous, and people of color develop, like often unconsciously develop, internalized racism, which is racism that exists within individuals. And in this case, I'm talking about the fact when you internalize your perception of your own inferiority compared to the dominant group of power. For example, in Finland, that means anyone who falls out of the norm of being white in some way or another. And then we have institutional racism that refers to racism that exists in institutions. In this case, for example, it could be a university or a workplace. So what kind of processes and practices might there be that reinforce somehow racist standards? For example, if it's recruiting, if it's racial biases in recruiting, how is that embedded in the processes of our organizations? And structural racism refers to racism as a structure, as a whole, where there are multiple institutions in society that collectively uphold these issues. And one key concept that we need to understand in addition to this is the process of racialization. It's a hard word, but it refers to a process in society that happens where the dominant group in power ascribes stereotypes and prejudice towards people because of their skin color, ethnicity, race, or, for example, religion. And that's why I wanted to bring up this picture from the context of Finland, where people who face racialization are also our indigenous people, the Sami people, also the history that we have with the Finnish Jews, the Roma people, for example. These all are also, this reflects the diversity of the Finnish society of people who have to experience racism here. And wow, that was the heaviest part. Thank you for bearing with me. Now I wanted to bring it more into the context of your industry. So why are we talking about this in tech or in coding? I wanted to highlight that internally, what is preventing us in building more racial equity is, for example, the fact that 77% of Black, African, Caribbean people or people from that descent don't feel that the European tech ecosystem, for example, provides equal or equitable opportunities for all. This was found out by Atomikos, a venture capital firm, a European venture capital firm, in their annual State of the European Tech Survey. And this is for the data from 2020. So I think these numbers are quite alarming, and I think it's a reflection of the struggle that people of color have with structural racism that is reflected in our working life. And another point that was found out in the Atomikos survey is that 59% of Black, Indigenous, and people of color had experienced discrimination in some form in the last 12 months. And if we compare it to, for example, white people or white men, we can see a drastic change. And this is talking about discrimination in general. So the numbers are alarming, and I just wanted to bring this up to remember us that these are the things internally that prevent us and stand in the way of building more racial equity, and we need to become more aware about these challenges. Then if we think externally, there are a lot of examples of how structural racism probably can be seen in, for example, tech products, in algorithms, in AI, and this is also a reflection of the lack of diversity in the teams that are developing these things. For example, it's just natural that there are perspectives that we might forget when we are surrounded with people very, very similar to us. To bring it again back to the context of companies, on the people level, racial biases and racial discrimination can, for example, be seen as minority stress that the employees themselves feel, or the straight biases or discrimination that they have to deal with from, for example, other employees. And on the organizational level, this can also be seen as lack of diversity and representation, or with these unequal or unequitable processes and practices. And recruiting was just one example of this that I mentioned, but it can also mean equitable career paths. Who are the people who develop in organizations, and who are the people who might be more disadvantaged to begin with in developing on your journey in an organization. Wow, it's interesting to try to talk about such a huge topic in a short amount of time, but maybe to conclude, I want to highlight that understanding the value of diversity and inclusion is super important, and I'm really happy that we're having this conversation, that we're developing. But understanding the value of diversity and inclusion, the D and I itself, is not enough. We need to recognize the structural barriers that disadvantage some people over others, and we need to take the E, the equity part, into account. We need to create more racial equity as a part of advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that requires that we also learn how to recognize structural racism and its effects more deeply. But to conclude with the encouraging words of the very wise Maya Angelou, I believe that when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, structural racism, or racial equity, that everybody is doing the best that they can until they know better. But I'm really hoping that when you know better, please do better, because Black, Indigenous, and people of color in the tech industry need allies, and we cannot move forward in this without solidarity and allyship. So you can start, for example, by learning more about this topic. That was my short speech about a huge topic in the tech industry. I hope you got some food for thought, and I'm thanking you at this point on my behalf.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was really a wonderful talk, Jasmin. Thank you so much. Let's see if we have some questions. But if not, I have questions.
Go ahead.
So, I mean, how do you monitor such racism happening at different levels? I mean, let's say, you have an HR, you got through because you were that competitive, but how do you monitor it further, on several hierarchies when people are interviewing, or, how do you monitor that?
Well, that's interesting. First of all, there are 2 points that come to my mind. First of all, there is still so much lack of understanding racism as a phenomenon that we need more understanding in order to be able to detect these inequities and be able to recognize visible and not so visible situation where we can, for example, see racism. So we need to be able to recognize these situations much better in the future. But in addition to that, I'm not an HR professional, but but for example, one way in recruitment, and maybe Emmi can add something to this, is to really try to standardize the processes. And some organizations have, for example, tried anonymous recruiting. I'm not saying that that's a perfect solution, but that is one way to, for example, reduce bias from a foreign sounding name, for example, because in Finland, for example, it has been researched that even a foreign sounding name decreases your chances of even getting a job interview. So yeah, I'm not an HR professional, but those are some examples that first pop up into my mind.
Yeah, Jasmin, those were really good examples. And also I've been participating and witnessing many good acts where there have been actually people volunteering to, for example, teach a group that belongs to a minority pool to have certain maybe tech skills that could help them to get certain jobs, and really sort of throwing themselves and making a path for different individuals who would otherwise be maybe struggling a bit to even find those skills, because of course tech is evolving all the time and we need to keep up, and it's always nice that people can actually take minorities into account in that way and create those paths intentionally.
Yeah, I think we would get some more answers in your talk, because I think your talk is about, like, how do you avoid bias or inclusion when recruiting. So I'm excited for your talk.
Yeah, but is Nassim sitting in the sauna? Yeah, he is.
Yes, I am.
What a Finnish thing, like giving a conference call in the sauna. But yeah, just to go back to this, like maybe to kind of try to crystallize my thoughts, is that of course learning how to recognize and mitigate unconscious bias is one very crucial way of also being able to reduce racial bias, which is one form of unconscious biases that we have. But that is a skill that every leader, HR professional should really develop, and it's basically continuous reflection and learning. So we just need to challenge ourselves more when it comes to unconscious biases as well, on the like human or people level. I'm not talking about the organizational level.
I really love the quote that when you know better, you do better. So I think that sort of gathers the whole organization together, that when everybody knows better, they will do better. They will do better choices. They will act based on facts rather than just intuition. So I think that was brilliant.
Thank you. Maybe just one more point that I just want to remind us, because in my work, I often hear arguments that why are we talking about racism at work? Like, we don't have that in our company, and we don't have that. We treat everyone the same. And maybe I just want to remind us that our companies, our workplaces they do not sit apart from our societies. So the problems of our societies are unfortunately reflected in our workplaces as well. And people of color, for example, can't leave their experiences at the door. So when we come to work, we still have to navigate the same racial biases, the same microaggressions and different aspects that really can be present in our lives every day. So we need to develop a more shared understanding of this so that we can be more inclusive towards each other.
Yep, very true. I was really shocked when you said that in Finland, with people with some names do not get hired. Like, how does, I mean, I'm hearing it for the first time. So
yeah, so there was a research conducted by one really big foundation in Finland, and the research found out that if you have even a foreign sounding name in Finland, your chances to get into a job interview decrease like drastically. But there was also a difference between, for example, an English sounding name and then an Iraqi and Somali sounding name. So for example, people with Middle Eastern or African names were even more unlikely to get into a job interview. And just to point out that this research was done in a way where the skills, experiences, and education were all basically the same. So it was really proven that the name was the thing that mattered. So that is a reflection of the biases that the hirers had. That's clear, that's evident, but it's very alarming, and that's why there's still a lot of work to do to reduce racial bias, for example.
Yep. I think we have a question. How can we bring SMEs into conversation? They often have so few resources that they cannot focus on much more than actual business.
At this point, I actually have to say that because I am not aware of this like industry, and I'm not a technical person, so unfortunately I don't have any answers to that.
But what I could actually say is that like the longer you wait to start this work, also the harder it becomes. When the company is quite small, it's still like quite it's a good way to kind of like put the inclusion and all the DEI work in place, because then it's like if the company becomes big, then it's more difficult to kind of like change the direction of the company.
Yeah,
Jasmin
by
wants
the
to say
way,
something.
yeah, no, well, I'm a human, so I thought that was some very fancy tech word. I didn't, but now, of course, I realized that we were talking about small, medium enterprises. I'm really sorry. That's why I dodged the question, because I was like, if this is a technical question, I don't know how to answer. But yeah, I actually think there's a lot of potential of bringing SMEs to the conversation, because the smaller the organization is, the more we actually have potential to have impact, because when we can build inclusion, for example, in the culture early on, we actually have more room to really impact these things. But it requires at least a will of power from the organization and recognition that these things are important. Otherwise, the conversation won't start. But I, of course, understand the resource side of things. For example, we are a company of 4 people, but we have made the decision to prioritize time for internal DI work so that we can also practice what we preach.
Yep, I really like this idea of you said that there is some kind of anonymous surveys happening. I mean, I was just wondering, let's say, if somebody faces some kind of racism in their company, how do they report this to their higher managers?
In an ideal situation, but that requires inclusive leadership. And that's why, again, going back to Nasim's points, inclusive leadership skills play a crucial role in advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion. For example, me, even though I'm a white passing person of color, but as a person of color, if I would not feel that my manager would understand me, I would probably not report to my manager. So because people of color also experience a lot of gaslighting, minimizing, questioning your experiences of racism, which is actually very normal, because people tend to get very defensive when we talk about racism. So to sum up, we definitely need inclusive leadership skills so that we can encourage people of color to even be have the to be able to report these things to the managers.
And actually, one good practical way to do this as well is to form a code of conduct together with the entire organization, so everybody knows like that if these kind of incidents happen, then the employees know that the company is behind them.
And maybe one thing to remind here is as well that it's really important, and I completely agree, but often also the educating about racism or different forms of discrimination is left on the minoritized or marginalized people's shoulders. So we can't also always
lean on them.
Yeah, definitely not. Like we need to also for example, I need to educate myself about trans rights. I need to educate myself about the like disadvantages that I don't have in order to become a better ally, for example, for transgender people. It's also a responsibility for people who don't experience racism to learn about it, so that it's not always on the person of color shoulders to educate others about their experiences, because it's also it requires emotional labor as well.
Absolutely. Okay, so thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jasmin, for your talk. Thank you, Nasim. And we move on to our next talk. So our next speaker is Emmy Marjetta, and she is a talent acquisition and employer branding manager at Hawks Hunt. And yes, as promised, Emmy, you have to start with saying your fun fact. So over to you, Emmy, and how are you doing, by the way?
I'm good. Thanks, Manjula. Great talks. Thank you, Jasmin. Thank you, Nasim. It has been an absolute pleasure so far. And yeah, I'm here to talk about how to avoid bias and exclusion while hiring. Yeah, firstly, the important fun facts. Yeah, what could I say? I love animals. Like Jasmine loves dogs. I love them also. I have a quite old pet turtle that I love so much, and yeah, he's the most spoiled turtle in the world. He was just here trying to bite my toes, and yeah, who wouldn't love animals? I also have picked up painting during this remote work time, and I really recommend everybody to try that out. It's very relaxing, and you can always do abstract piece if you don't know how to start otherwise. But yeah, I think that was pretty much the fact part in that sense.
Okay.
Hi all, and welcome to talk about. Hi all, and welcome to talk about inclusion in hiring. In this session, I will tell you why inclusion is important in hiring and how to increase it and avoid exclusion and biases while recruiting. I also want to thank you for having me here in React Finland with you, and thank you beforehand for your interest. Just briefly about me, my name is Emmi Marjetta. I'm talent acquisition and employee branding manager at Hawks Hunt, and I've been working with talent acquisition for the past 10 years, focusing on technology field and especially in cybersecurity. And now let's dive into the subject. My agenda consists of 2 steps. Firstly, I will talk about why would we need inclusion, why it's important in hiring, and then I will tell you a few practical steps how to increase it when recruiting. So firstly, why inclusion is important in hiring. I think that one important angle to think about is that diversity and inclusion will attract wider amount of talent for your reach. So there will be more candidates who would be interested about your company when you would take them into account and think about their needs and what really speaks to them. So therefore, the companies who are taking actions towards inclusion are most likely the ones who will be making the top hires because they attract the widest group possible in the talent market. So also, I have gathered here a few numbers for you to see regarding the subject. I have selected a Harvard business study from 2019 here, and it showed that when people feel belonging towards their work, they are more productive, engaged, and 3.5 times more likely to contribute their fullest potential. And that belonging is very important, and that can be reached through inclusion by taking different needs and different views and experiences into account. And I think that the full potential is what we are really seeking for when we are hiring, when we are nurturing the existing talent. And that's really important to note that inclusion has a big impact on that. The another report that I wanted to highlight is made by McKinsey. It was published in 2020 and it's called Diversity Wins. And it showed in the analysis, and by the way, the data consists of 15 countries, over 1,000 companies, so it's very wide. And it showed that the companies in the top quartile for gender diversity on executive teams were 25% more likely to have above average profitability than companies who were lacking in that area and being in the fourth quarter. So that's also very interesting, and yeah, important to highlight that inclusion really creates a feeling of belonging into the company, and that is one key element of the high performance. What then are the practical steps that you can utilize and take into account when increasing inclusion in your recruitment work? I have gathered a few practical steps here for you to see, and I will talk them through for you. But firstly, I wanted to just point out that it's also important to think about what does inclusion mean to you personally and in your organization at the moment, and is that a topic that has been taken into account for some time now, or is that something that could be strengthened and maybe established, or what is like the starting point for you personally also, and for the company you work at? And you can also set up some concrete goals toward certain talent groups. If there are certain individuals you know that are working among the positions you would like to attract, but you are not having established connection to them, that might be a good concrete goal that you can start to think about. Yeah, so good practical steps are, I think, considering narrative and visual images. And when we think about narrative, for example, all organizations have their own language and narrative towards the outer world, towards the talents. So if you or anyone would like to attract diverse individuals, the language narrative should also be taken into account, not being too vague about what is seeked and what kind of talent is needed. A good example about this is job titles. And some time ago, it was quite fashionable to seek out for ninjas or rock stars or superheroes of some kind. And those might be seen as examples of a little bit misleading titles, not so clear for the talent audience, and that's why those might attract only quite a narrow talent pool. So being clear in the narrative is one thing, but also thinking about gender sensitivity, that's also another subject I wanted to highlight. And if we think about beyond pronouns like he or she, there are also some words that could be clearly masculine or feminine, and creating inclusion with language is called gender sensitive language, and it's promoted by, for example, European Institute of Gender Diversity. And for example, job ads If we think about those, the words, for example, like determined, challenger type, greedy for success, those might be seen as more masculine ones, and words such as cooperative, supportive, sensitive, those might be seen as more feminine ones. So the gender sensitive language is also good to take into account when writing job ads or social media posts, or creating the narrative for the talent group in some other ways. And also the visual images. They should also speak to a wider group of talents. So it's good to take into account whether those include diverse individuals, or whether they have been maybe by a mistake selected to represent only certain types of individuals, even though your company might have a large employee base of different kinds of individuals. So good to take that visual world also into account. And when you are meeting with the talents, of course, you want to be fair and compare them in the fairest possible way. So there, the structured interview template is a good starting point. And what does that mean? It means that you will have the same key questions or key criteria to each candidate, and you give them scores according to those. Then you are able to make comparison in the fair way. So examples about structured interview questions could be maybe, for example, tell me how you would handle some specific challenge that is occurring in this position, and then you could describe the challenge. What could it be in the position you are hiring for? Or maybe to ask the candidate to tell about the favorite software, what are the features in it, and how would the candidate describe it to a person who doesn't have any technical knowledge, or at least is not up to the talents level. So those might be some examples, and there are much more. If you want to dive into those, you will find much more examples and good practical tips when you search for structured interview. So yeah, then when you seek for talent, if your company is doing a direct search, there could be some goals to include certain amount of variety into those profiles. That could at least be a good way to remind ourselves to keep the talent search diverse, and also think about if you are posting job ads or social media posts about openings, where to post them, that if there are some channels that those talents belonging maybe to minority groups of your field might be looking for, just to support them and making sure that they will also see those openings. And once you have the talent within your company, it's good to make sure that there are enough equal career possibilities, so you will have the best possible chances to keep the talent growing within your organization. And to summarize this, what would inclusion bring? When you enhance it in hiring, it will give you more candidates, more engagement, and more productivity. You will be able to attract a much wider group of individuals. Once they're employed, they will be more engaged, and they will most likely drive drive themselves forward and try to achieve as good results as possible. And how you can achieve that. In hiring, I would recommend you to try to think about clear, neutral language, and think about whether the visual images are inclusive and speak to the wider audience in the talent market, and also to include some structure for your interview, even though if you would like to have a casual chat that we all would, of course, enjoy when discussing with candidates or when being in the job interview situation. There is always room for that casual, nice chat, but some structure is also very good to be added so you can compare candidates in the fair way. So I think this was what I wanted to say to you at this point. I really thank you for your time and for your interest. And if you have any questions or comments, I'm happy to answer those. And thank you. I wish you a very nice rest of the day.
Thank you. That was a wonderful talk. Thank you too much for sharing all the insights. I have few questions for you from the comments. Okay, so the first one is, will you be inclusive to people who don't agree with you or your agenda? Yeah, your with you or your agenda, your worldview. So your view, how do you take this?
I think this is very good question, also quite interesting and complex question. I think maybe in this context, the agenda and worldview might be seen when we are thinking about business contexts, maybe the values of the company or the ethical aspects. And of course, I think there are some blockers in there which you cannot just go around, even if you would like to be as inclusive you possibly can. Of course, there are some obstacles that might still hinge if the person's worldview in this sense, maybe values are conflicting with the ones in the company, for example, equality and behavioral code and something like that. So I think those are both be taking into account. I think you're muted, Manjula.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No
Okay,
worries.
so this next question is, most of you spoke about maximizing potential. What if maximizing potential ended up in a group that doesn't obey your diversity or inclusion? Will you swap out good candidates for their skin color?
Another very good question. And I would just love to also ask these questions in front of the whole organization, going up to the leader level, because this is such an important thing to think about, that when you enhance inclusion, will you be securing the company culture and everything other good things that you want to keep? So not just thinking about that, yeah, we want tick minority boxes. It's not inclusion really. It's just like, well, ticking the boxes. But when you give possibilities to different kinds of individuals, and you sort of invite them to the party and also invite them for a dance, that's inclusion. And then also there are some values and codes of conduct, for example, that also needs to happen. So I don't wish that this is a swap for anything, but just to giving possibilities to everybody and treating everybody equally.
Thank you for that. And we have the next one. So we often make sure to ask candidate about their views on diversity and inclusion. Can you share some tips on how we can frame these questions to know more from them?
This is also super good tip for everybody to sort of put in the agenda when meeting candidates or other members in the technology field. I think that what we usually do in my organization is that we sort of showcase the projects we have been doing when we have been tried to promote minorities to enter, for example, the technology field. For example, we have been supported women or people identified themselves as women who want to enter in the technology field from another field. So they are career changers, and we have created webinars for them and showed them some supportive content. So we have showcased that when we have met candidates and sort of created a discussion around that actual example, and then got the views how the candidate was feeling about that, and whether that excited the candidate or what kind of thoughts it raised.
Yeah, hello. So I'm Juha Webstein and I'm one of the organizers. So I'm filling in as Jasmin and Nasim had to go. So I think now we move to more general discussion. I mean, I'm not really an expert on the topic, but at the same time, I know something about running events. And I mean, we're running React Finland. So why do we have inclusivity session, or why do we have these softer topics? But I think that's sort of related, because from my point of view, even if you have very focused conference, or in a way it's a scoped conference, it should be about React. So you could say only React topics, but at the same time, I think there's value in bringing these soft topics to the schedule as well. And I think that's sort of related to this topic of the session as well. So inclusivity doesn't mean that you have to give up your opinions, but it means that you can expand a tiny bit at least.
Yeah, and at least I learned a really good word, and it's an ally. So I really want to personally be an ally to everybody who would experience these feelings of exclusion. So that's why personally I think that even I might go as a quite average Finn in our society here, I need to know about this. I need to act right, and the more I know, the better I can act and be a good ally in this topic. So that's why I think it's very nice to have this in the agenda, and I think it's very heartwarming that inclusion is at least talked about, so we can all know better and then act better.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things I did, I mean, I was living abroad for a couple of years, and I think it gave me a lot of perspective on my own culture and nation and other cultures as well. So I mean, it's not something everybody can do, but if you can go elsewhere for a while, I think it's going to help in regards of understanding the topic, because then you can really feel included or excluded, or what it feels like to find your communities abroad and all this.
Exactly. Yeah. You will always belong to a minority in some group. You just have to be in that place.
Yeah, that's the thing, and I think I mean, everybody is individual in the sense that you belong to some groups. I mean, you have some nationality, you have maybe have some, I mean, a skin color, and you like use React, or you're a programmer, or you're a recruiter, or I mean, we like to give a lot of labels to ourselves. So it's sort of, and I think the topic itself, you can look at it from many perspectives. So like, let's say I'm a developer and I have to work with designers. So maybe it's good for me to learn something about what the designers are doing. So that's going to help me become a better developer. So it's not just this high level topics, but something maybe really more practical.
Yeah. Also, like Emmy, I have a quick question for you. How do you make sure that the person you were kind of hiding was also more passionate about inclusion or diversity in general. How do we bench that? How do we mark that?
I think that, and yeah, good question, Manjula. I think that the company culture also plays a big part on that. So when your company culture is built in a way that it thinks that these things are important and they are on the table, people will get involved and people will have possibilities to learn and participate in these kind of actions. So I think personal goodwill and willingness to learn and act right combined into a company culture that supports these aspects is the way to have these things raising in the organization, keep them in the agenda, and there the sort of the balance is right, and it's not up to any individual's personal shoulders, but it's like a shared value and shared act.
Thank you for that answer.
Yeah. So do you have any questions? Yeah, I don't have any questions from YouTube. Or do you have anything left to discuss, or do you think we should wrap up the session? That's fine as well.
Yep, I think we can wrap up.
All right. So thank you, everyone, and we still have a lot of sessions left. The next one will be about styling, and I mean, today we have in total 5 sessions, and then we have 8 sessions in total during the next 2 days. So there's a lot to cover, and if anybody's following, I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference, and thanks for participating in this session. So
thanks, Emmy.
thank you.
Thanks for the talk.
Thank you,
so much.
everybody.
Thank
Enjoy
you.
the other sessions.